In this edition of the Bucs Report, we talk about, is this Bucs team for real? And is this winning sustainable? We'll discuss next on this edition of the Bucs Report. Let's go! Well, hello and welcome into this edition of the Bucs Report. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's BucsReport.com. Today's episode is brought to you by SeatGeek. Take $20 off your first ticket purchase when you use my promo code TALKNATS. That's promo code TALKNATS at SeatGeek.com to take $20 off your first ticket purchase. Yes, that includes Bucs tickets, music, comedy, theater, whatever. So check that out. We're also sponsored by Manscaped. Take 20% off plus free shipping when you use my promo code MinuteCast at Manscaped.com. And this episode is also streaming on 102.9 The Game. In today's episode of the Bucs Report, we talk about Baker Mayfield. Impressive so far. Is it sustainable? We'll talk about that in the show. A little bit later, we will talk about Antoine Winfield Jr. and how I think that ultimately he deserves more credit. And then we will talk about the Bucs over the Saints. But in today's episode, we have JT Olson on the show of the Creamsicle Chronicles podcast. JT, welcome to the show.
Dan, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
It's great to have you on. So if I had told you, before the season started, at the end of last year, Brady's gone. He's not here anymore. If I would have told you that the Bucs would be sitting right now in first place in the NFC South, what would you have thought?
I would have thought they were a little ahead of schedule of where I predicted them to be. I had them winning 10 games looking at the season overall coming into the year. But I did give the Saints the edge last week, just being a rivalry game on the road. You can compete in that game. It's always a tough game, but I always favor the home team in those kind of coin flips. So I always thought this was very possible with what the Bucs had in terms of returning roster. But I think it's even better than what I expected.
It is impressive, and I think that a lot of it is due in part to Dave Canales, the offensive coordinator. I mean, there was a lot, riding on him coming over here. It was kind of a coin flip, what kind of success he was going to have. We know he was successful in Seattle as a quarterback's coach, but sometimes that doesn't necessarily translate to that position. And there is already an intriguing storyline out there that potentially the Chicago Bears could be pursuing Dave Canales as their next head coach. Can you believe that? Kind of crazy things. What were your thoughts when you heard that?
I'm not surprised necessarily because Dave Canales is incredibly bright. He wins every press conference he goes to. He's very transparent. He's very open to different ideas, different lines of thought, and he comes from a great tree. But it is a little surprising considering he's only been an offensive coordinator for 4 games. And granted, they've been a good 4 games, but it's not this isn't prime Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill kind of offense. This is an effective offense, although not an extremely explosive, eye-popping offense. So there's everything to like, and there's every reason to think Canales will be a head coach down the line. It just seems a little premature for me.
And my thought on it is ultimately, if he can get the Buccaneers to the playoffs or maybe even to the Super Bowl, then I guess I'm okay with him moving on to another team. Mission accomplished. But the biggest thing I think about Dave Canales is he is giving a lot of other teams, the opponents, a lot of different looks. I was taking a look at the score sheet from the game, and it was interesting. I had to look twice, and then I'm like, oh, that's right. I do remember that. Chris Godwin was on the record for a pass. It wasn't just Baker Mayfield. It was Chris Godwin. Tell me if you had that scripted out. If you had, you should be betting more money in Vegas. You would be totally killing it there. So I think that ultimately that's what it's about, is that Canales is giving a lot of the opposition a lot of different looks. One of the biggest knocks against the Bucs last season was that Byron Leftwich and the offense was predictable. Weigh in on Canales and how important is he in the Buccaneers' recent success?
I think Canales is the key to the Bucs' recent success. We knew this was going to be a good defense. Todd Bowles, a brilliant defensive coordinator, a brilliant defensive mind. But even with that, we saw the struggles this team had last year. So I think Canales bringing in this new Sean McVay style system where he learned in Seattle under Shane Waldron, I think that has made all the difference. And not just that, he's also learned from Schottenheimer. He's learned from, so many bright offensive coaches, and he's taken a little bit from all of them. But the way he's brought in this system, especially for what it's done with the offensive line and keeping Baker Mayfield within himself, I think is really what's made this offense run so far this year.
And an interesting thing and kind of an out there thing to say, I honestly think that the Buccaneers are better right now with Baker Mayfield than they were with Tom Brady in his last year. The more we get separated from Brady's time here, we're starting to hear different things about, Brady wasn't that great. If there wasn't, someone available, he was throwing the football away. That Mike Evans wasn't getting as much action last year is because if Brady didn't see anyone open, he would throw the football away. Is it your perception that the Buccaneers are better now with Baker Mayfield than they were, say, the last year with Tom Brady?
I would absolutely say so. And it comes down to two things for me. One, Tom Brady did not want to get hit last year. You could tell, 45 years old. He just did not want that contact behind a shaky offensive line. He was, ready for it. He was predicting it, and he almost played a little scared sometimes. And two, he finally started losing that battle to father time, started losing a little bit on his deep ball. We saw him consistently underthrow guys like Scotty Miller. So I think having a quarterback who's, one, a little bit more mobile, a little bit more willing to take contact, and two, still has that live arm, I think that's made all the difference for this offense.
Yeah, and that's a big thing, is just a lot of different looks. And the thing that I like about Baker, and we'll talk about him in a following segment here, is he's a mobile quarterback. So it's giving a lot of teams a lot of different looks. But so far, I've been impressed with this team. And, there was a lot of questions as we went into this year about what kind of Buccaneers team this was going to be. We've heard that Baker Mayfield had a chip on his shoulder, but then we've also heard from different Buccaneers that, this wasn't just Tom Brady's team. We're still, great players. And I think there was just that urge to prove to everyone that they are still a legitimate threat in the National Football League and most notably in the NFC South. Do you think that a lot of people, these insiders, these experts, are kind of eating their words now that Baker Mayfield, who a lot of them giggled at when he came to the Bucs, is kind of just, proving a lot of different people wrong?
Oh, absolutely. And I never understood the thought process, Peter King predicting them to win 2 games. I know locally here in Michigan, they're still laughing at the idea of the Bucs being a good team. This is a Bucs team that has 8 returning starters from that Super Bowl team on defense alone. And then you got Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Tristan Wirfs. I mean, this team is still loaded with talent from that Super Bowl team. So, I mean, we're starting to see a little bit of the walking it back from the national media. I know guys like Jim Rome have come out in support of Baker, saying he's always been a fan of his. Booger McFarland came out, said he was dead wrong about Baker and the Bucs. I think it was just really, a very surface level evaluation, seeing Tom Brady leave and expecting the Bucs to go back to the bottom, kind of like what Cam Jordan had said they would do. And not really evaluating the roster or the addition of Canales and what that meant. So I think it was just, honestly, I think it was just lazy evaluation from a lot of people, and now they really have to live with that.
And it kind of makes you start to think maybe we shouldn't trust these so-called experts so much. All right, so coming up here after the break, we will talk about the Bucs versus the Saints. What went right? How do they keep this winning going? I'll discuss coming up. All right, welcome back into this edition of the Bucs Report. So the Bucs take down the Saints. That was supposed to be one of the tougher games out there. There was a lot of questions if it was going to be Carr or if they were going to face famous Jameis Winston. As it turns out, it was primarily Carr. So it was a lopsided win. I don't think that anyone saw that coming. Again, why we shouldn't trust these so-called experts. The Buccaneers take down the Saints by a score of 26-9. As you watch the game and as you reflect on it now, what were your thoughts on the game and how are they getting it done?
I was a little surprised in how they dominated this game because the Saints are a team that came into the year with a lot of questions, just like the Bucs. A lot of their star players are on the older side: Tyrann Mathieu, Cameron Jordan, Demario Davis. They're all, early mid-30s. But this defense had been playing well this year. They hadn't allowed 20 points in a game, I think, for 12, 14 games, something like that. It's been a long time since they'd allowed 20 points to an opposing offense, which you would expect with a defensive-minded coach. But I felt like the Bucs just played their game and they controlled everything, and it was never really all that close. It felt like it was going to be a little bit closer going into the half once Baker threw the interception in the end zone, but Antoine Winfield made a great play, turned that game around, and the Bucs just controlled it the rest of the way. So really, I knew the Bucs had a good chance to win it because I think those rosters are both really evenly matched if they're all playing their best. But I was not expecting them to dominate and control the Saints the way they did.
And I imagine you had to laugh as I did that Jameis Winston came in the game, and guess what he did? He threw an interception. What was your reaction to Jameis coming in the first play he makes there? He throws for an interception. What were your thoughts?
It just reminded me like old times, Jameis comes in and you know what you're getting from him. He's going to air it out. He has no fear. And, at that point, what do you have to lose at that point in the game? But, it just brought me back to early Jameis, Mike Evans days and, the roller coaster that it's always been with him. And it's a warm, fuzzy feeling, but I think it's warm and fuzzy because I don't have to feel it anymore.
And just talking about Jameis here for a moment, I do think that, when he first came over to the team and he was starting to get some action, he was actually playing a little bit better. And that was the thing about Jameis, is he held all kinds of records for the Bucs in a good way, and he also held all kinds of records in a bad way, i.e. interception. So you got to think that I don't know if he's going to even have a future in the NFL after this season. He's already kind of a second string quarterback. I don't know what his future is, but it just doesn't seem like you can teach an old dog new tricks. But taking a look at the box score in particular, they were getting a lot of contribution from, players that weren't really popping on the page last year. Devin Tompkins with a touchdown, Cade Otton, Trey Palmer, and Antoine Winfield, and Trey Palmer, my notes were cut off there. So pretty impressive, all things considered, how this Bucs team was able to get this done. And like I say, they were able to get it done. If you take a look at Palmer, for example, or Tompkins, this isn't just the Evans Godwin show. You're starting to see production from a lot of different sources, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely a function of this offense. The previous regime, it was, we are going to out-talent you. Mike Evans is better than your corner. Chris Godwin is better than your corner. They're going to beat you. This is a little bit more scheming people open and, getting guys like Trey or Devin Tompkins, open looks. I think that's just smart game planning. And then, obviously there's a talent element there too. That touchdown catch by Trey Palmer, that was a nice catch. That was an individual making a play. But you look at it, this is a 6th-round pick in Trey Palmer, an undrafted free agent in Devin Tompkins, and an undrafted free agent in Raheem Jarrett. And that was basically your wide receiver room once Mike Evans went out. You had Chris Godwin, who the defense could key in on at that point, and you really had to make other guys beat you. And your highest investment is a 4th-round pick in Cade Otton. So it's been really nice seeing these other players get a chance to shine. They have skill sets, and utilizing and maximizing those skill sets, I think that's just a reflection of how good Dave Canales has been and really getting the most out of the talent he has.
Yeah, and I think that has been the big thing, and we'll talk about Baker a little bit later. But just since I'm looking at the box score here, 25 for 32, 3 touchdowns. So you take a look at it. I don't think we could really ask for anything more from Baker at this point. We know that there was this supposed quarterback battle. I ultimately think that was just window dressing and lip service. I just think that they wanted Trask to feel like he was in the game. I don't think there was ever really a possibility unless Mayfield totally fell on his face. But yeah, you're starting to hear a lot of players around the Buccaneers talk about, again, like I talked about earlier, that it wasn't just a Brady show. 3 in a row, receiver Chris Godwin said to linebacker Devin White on the sideline Sunday, talking about the potential for 3 straight division titles. You feel me? They love to talk all that big talk. They said, Tom's not here, whatever, you feel me? They think they can just run it. This damn division still goes through us, bro. That is some strong talk out there. And I think, to say that it's just a chip on the shoulder of Baker Mayfield isn't correct. I think there's a lot of players on this team saying, this team's sole identity wasn't just Tom Brady. I think that there is a real hunger from a lot of different players to prove that this Bucs team is still a legitimate threat and are going to do their level best to make a push for the playoffs and, dare I say, a Super Bowl. What do you think?
I think it is a perfect blend of both those mentalities coming together. Again, the Bucs are very talented. They have a lot of returning players, and I think they heard a lot of the noise, a lot of the buzz. And then Baker Mayfield, he's always kind of had that "F-you, me against the world" attitude. And I think the team has just embraced that about him even more so. The Bucs have always been kind of like the nice guy of the NFL. They come in, they play hard. A lot of times they lose, and they go home. They don't make that much noise. 2 Super Bowl seasons aside. But Baker Mayfield he's really never been that kind of guy. He's gonna, lead the charge. He's gonna say, "Hey, you're coming with me. We're going to war, and we're gonna do this thing." So I really think it's a perfect blend of both teams having that chip on their shoulder, both the returning roster and Baker Mayfield, and him just kind of always being that guy and personifying it.
Yeah, I think he was the perfect fit for this team. One area of concern was Mike Evans. Evans caught 3 passes for 40 yards and drew a key pass interference flag on Marshawn Lattimore. I always love that. But before exiting the game, the Bucs were able to continue moving the ball in his absence. As we know, he had that issue with his hamstring. How concerned are you about Evans? And have you heard anything more about him personally, or when do you see him coming back?
I haven't heard anything more about him, but I am a little concerned just because of the quality of opponent they play after the bye with the Lions. I think the Lions are kind of similar to the Bucs. They're kind of always that overlooked team, but this year they have a real roster, and I think they're the team to beat in their division. But at the same time, Mike Evans, it feels like every year he's dealing with a hamstring injury, and he's always tough, and he always comes back, maybe misses a game, but I just really don't want it to be this game. Especially me living in Michigan, I've been talking a lot of smack from the offseason to now. So I really want Mike Evans to come in and, make me look good here.
And, one of the things about his contract is we know he went into this season and his agent gave the Bucs until the Saturday before the first game of the season as the cutoff, and all conversations will cease. That is what was said. And there was no conversation. So, if he's going to be a man of his word, there is going to be no further conversations. You got to kind of start to think to a certain extent that maybe Jason Light and maybe the Glazers are saying, Evans is a good player on this team, of course, but he is prone to being injured. And it seems like there is always some kind of injury that he faces every single year. Do you think that there's a little bit to that, there are a little bit of reluctance there because I don't want to say is injury prone, but with that said, he does get injured, it seems like at least once a year for the last few years. What do you think?
I think it's very rare that players get older and they get more durable. Especially you got to make tough decisions with guys like Devin White becoming a free agent, Antoine Winfield becoming a free agent, Tristan Wirfs becoming a free agent, and Baker Mayfield's kind of becoming the heartbeat of this offense, and Mike Evans. And you look at those guys and you have a bunch of guys in their early 20s, and you have one guy, going into his early 30s. It's a hard decision to make, but I think we have to come to the reality. Even if we're going to bring back Mike Evans. I think 2 years from now, we're either without Mike Evans or Chris Godwin. So we are going to have to come to terms with that here in the next year. It's just kind of one of those things that it's coming, but you just kind of put it out of your mind that that's a future Jeff problem to worry about and just kind of enjoy the ride for this season. But I definitely think that's something that the Glazers and Jason Light foresaw, and they didn't blink. Unlike the Colts, who just re-signed Jonathan Taylor after a lengthy contract dispute. I am concerned about his future in Tampa.
Yeah, I am too, and it seems like the Glazers, you can't really play hardball with them. If you want to play like that with me, then you can just see yourself to the door there. So kind of a tough thing. Mike Evans, of course, I love Mike Evans, but it's rare that you have two really great receivers on the team, or not more than two, but two in particular, Godwin and Evans, just two really great wide receivers on this team. All right, so coming up here after the break, we will talk about Baker Mayfield, and is this sustainable, or is this just a blip on the radar and he's going to fall apart? We'll talk about that coming up.
We're brought to you today by Manscaped, who has taken a step from Halloween to bring your face the cleanest shave it's ever seen. So this season, no need to toil and trouble. Manscaped's all-new Handyman is the best way to get rid of that stubble. Featuring a compact design and next-gen skin-safe technology, the Handyman was designed to give you that smooth finish without the mess of a traditional shave. Get the sweetest treat this Halloween by going to manscaped.com and use code MINUTECAST for 20% off plus free shipping. And for my Wolfman with a little more scruff, Manscaped's Beard Hedger Pro Kit has everything you need to tame your mane. This cordless trimmer has a rotary wheel that gives you 20 hair cutting lengths, all with one guard. So no more drawers full of extra add-on, one collecting cobwebs. That's right, your Halloween costumes may take effort, but beard grooming doesn't need to when you can get 20 different beard lengths, all with one guard. The Beard Hedger is a high-tech piece of art in a travel-size package with a long-lasting battery, universal charging, and a strong motor. There's no trick with this treat. Manscaped has you covered. Get 20% off and free shipping with code MINUTECAST at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com and use promo code MINUTECAST for a look as sweet as candy. Get yourself the Handyman from Manscaped.
All right, welcome back into this edition of the Bucs Report. So taking a look at Baker Mayfield, he does get a lot of the credit, and I think he deserves a lot of the credit. I mean, I do think the Buccaneers would be in this position if, say, Trask was starting. I think that is a topic for a different podcast. But taking a look at him, historically, Mayfield went 3-7 in his last 10 starts with the Browns in 2021, and then went 1-5 with the Panthers and 1-3 with the Rams last year. But he's 3-1. And he has the Bucs alone atop the NFC South standings. What is the secret sauce with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? Why is he able to get it done here when he wasn't able to get it done elsewhere?
Well, I think you look at last year and you look at two really bad situations. We know the Panthers, over the last year and a half, they've been one of the worst teams in the NFL. Obviously, winless this year. They traded up for the number one pick last year. I think they were originally picking 9th. So that's a hard situation to be successful in, especially with a coaching staff that was unfunctional and getting into training camp late. He was kind of put behind the 8 ball from the start. Once he got into LA, I think the record was bad because the roster was bad. That was a team that didn't have Cooper Kupp. That had sustained a lot of injuries. And frankly, it's just not a very talented roster top to bottom, even when they're healthy. If you're not looking at their top-end stars like Stafford and Kupp and Donald. But even with a poor record in LA, we did see him have success. He had a 2-to-1 touchdown interception ratio, and I think he really clicked in that offense. I think that's only served him coming into this year in a very similar system. Again, Canales, through Shane Waldron, comes from the Sean McVay tree. This is the Sean McVay style offense. And it kind of gave him a head start into this year, and I think he's only built on that success.
And it has been most impressive thus far. He led the Bucs to a 3-1 record, including road wins against the Vikings and Saints. He's thrown for 7 touchdowns and only 2 interceptions. He's won over this team, and this is only in the first month here. Through 4 games, he has the exact same 7-2 touchdown to interception ratio as he did in 2020, and he has thrown more yards and is completing 69.6 of his passes compared to 62.6 in 2020. So things are gelling with him on this team. The difficult part now, however, is he came here on the cheap. He signed a 1-year prove me deal, and I think that a lot of Buccaneers are like, great, we'll just sign him to a new deal. And I think his agent is going to say, no. Not so fast. You got him cheap this last time because it was a prove me deal. He signed a deal that was cheaper than some backup quarterbacks have. The problem, I guess, if we're going to call it a problem, is that if he plays so well that the contract he is going to garner is going to be that much higher, how concerned are you about that? Are you just concentrated on this year, or are you kind of like me where you kind of see things are going well this year, but how's this going to play out in the following years?
So my roots come from NFL draft writing that led into Bucs writing. So I'm always kind of focused on the future, focused on the draft. How replaceable is this player versus this coming rookie? And if I'm just looking at statistics, I wouldn't be as worried about it because I do think the Bucs could get a quarterback in this draft, which is a good quarterback draft. You get a guy, even if you're picking in the late first round, a guy like J.J. McCarthy. I think he could come in and put up similar production just because I think this is a very quarterback-friendly offense. My concern is Baker Mayfield has become one of the leaders on this team, and that's something that isn't easily replaced, definitely not by a rookie. So if I'm just looking at the box scores and statistical output, I think Baker Mayfield is replaceable, but you cannot replace a leader in the locker room like that. It's hard to just let that guy walk out the door after all he's done for this team, and I expect him to continue doing for this team and leading them to the playoffs. It's going to be a very difficult conversation to be had at the end of the year, especially considering some of the other key free agents.
And the tough thing about the draft, and I hear that, but it seems like when the Bucs draft a quarterback, it's squandered. Take a look at Jameis Winston. Take a look at Kyle Trask, that they draft these quarterbacks and they never have the patience to kind of let them come into their own. They're constantly in win now mode. Why? Because they're trying to make the most of the Evans, Godwin, Levante David, fill in the blank era. And they want to get as much creamsicle juice out of this as they possibly can. The perils of that, however, is that you draft quarterbacks and you never let them grow. You take a look at Jameis Winston, which I guess that there's a bit of an argument there. They did give him ample opportunity and he blew it. Again, flashes of greatness, but Trask in particular, was that a throwaway thing there? Is he ever going to get his opportunity? What are your thoughts on Trask? Does he have a viable future? And was Jameis Winston ultimately just a big mistake?
I'll start with Jameis. I think looking back at that draft, I don't think it was a mistake. He was a very pro-ready quarterback, and we knew even coming out of college he had an interception problem, and that's something you had to kind of coach out of him. I'd rather have a guy that's a little too aggressive than a guy you have to kind of make a little bit more aggressive. The problem is they just couldn't get it out of him. Lovie Smith, Dirk Cutter, and Bruce Arians came in ready to win right now, and he was not ready to develop a guy like Jameis, who was already year 4, year 5 in his career. So I don't think it was a mistake. I just think he was not properly developed by coaching staffs we had at the time. And then in terms of Kyle Trask, I do feel like that was a throwaway pick. I never understood the pick. I get wanting to groom a guy behind Tom Brady, but Trask is never a guy who had strong physical tools in college. He had very little mobility. He had very modest arm. And he was very, very productive at Florida. But, watching his tape, I didn't think he was very impressive. I think he was more, a guy like Kyle Pitts around him or Kadarius Toney around him. He really shined with great playmakers in college. And I just never saw that transferring to the NFL.
Yeah, and kind of when I look at him, I see a backup quarterback at best. Maybe sometimes a change of scenery, a change of zip code can be just what the doctor ordered. I'm not so sure that that is the case with Kyle Trask, but another player that has really stood out that I don't think gets enough credit, and if you're a Bucs fan, of course you love him, is Antoine Winfield Jr. I'm going to go ahead and say that I don't think the Bucs would have the record that they have right now if it was not for Antoine Winfield Jr., a huge piece on this team. First, he outpaced Alvin Kamara to the sidelines, dropped behind the line of scrimmage for a loss of 6, bringing up a 2nd and long. 2 plays later, Winfield was in the end zone, breaking up a pass which forced a Saints punt. Winfield became the first player since Justin Houston in 2018 to record multiple games with 5 or more tackles, a sack, a forced fumble, a fumble recovery in a single season, and it's only week 4 of the 2023 season. Wow, Antoine Winfield is worth his weight in gold, whatever they need. Whatever he needs for his contract. I don't have that in front of me, but if it's due here soon, back up the Brinks truck to his house, give him the checkbook, have him fill it out. He is one heck of a player. Talk to me about Antoine Winfield and his huge impact on this Bucs team.
I think Antoine Winfield is playing like the best safety in the NFL right now. And, there are a lot of good safeties in the league right now. Kevin Byard in Tennessee, Minkah Fitzpatrick in Pittsburgh, Derwin James in LA. I think right here, right now, Winfield is playing as good, if not better than any of them. So in a contract year, you'd really like to see him taking that next step, becoming one of the foundational pieces on defense. And like you said, they're going to have to back up the truck to his house. It's going to be him and Tristan Wirfs, and maybe if there's a little bit left over, you sprinkle some to Devin White and Baker Mayfield, but he is making himself the priority on defense right now.
So being that you bring that up, they are going to face some tough questions. You bring up Devin White. Do you think that ultimately is going to get done? And at the conclusion of this season, who of these key players that we're talking about here probably have played their last season with the Bucs?
I think Devin White is having a really good year so far. He's someone who's been inconsistent throughout his career. I'm someone who's been critical of him. He's had a lot of lapses in coverage, but he's been very sound from all his fundamental aspects, and he's such a great athlete, and he's such an electric personality. I think he's making it a difficult conversation where a month ago I would say, this is probably Devin's last season in Tampa. They cannot make him the highest paid linebacker in the league. And frankly, I still don't know that they can because they have so many guys to sign. And while they do have $50 million in cap space next year, and that's one of the most in the league, $50 million doesn't go that far when you've got to pay 30 to Tristan Wirfs and 15 to Antoine Winfield. And, you've got a quarterback situation to figure out. So I am worried Mike is out the door because of that. And it's becoming more a conversation, Baker Mayfield and Devin White. And a month ago, I'd be happy parting with both. But now they're making me look at them as long-term pieces, and that's making it that much harder.
And it's a tough thing because, when we moved past, I say we, I mean the Buccaneers, they moved past Tom Brady and all that entailed, that we thought that this is the future. But it seems like we're kind of coming up against it again at the end of this season. I think that they need to come to terms with a lot of these key pieces on the team, be willing to part with some of those. Those are tough conversations to have, one that I would not want to have. I don't envy Jason Light's job at all. It seems a bit difficult. Do you think that this team is sustainable? Let's say they do make it to the playoffs. Do you think that they can kind of push this down the road and get this in multiple years, or are they all in this year and then let's try it all again next year?
I do think it's sustainable to a degree. I feel like Jason Light has done a really good job in the last few years, kind of planning for the future, kind of planning for that next wave, getting guys like Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, who I think is a very nice player. I really, really like Kalijah Kancey, who we drafted in the first round this year. Luke Gadecki, is looking more and more like a long-term piece on the offensive line. Logan Hall was a high upside pick, so last year was a lot of development, and we're starting to get a little bit more out of him this year. He's quietly been laying the foundation for the next wave, but he's got to have a really good offense to continue to sustain that. Who is going to replace Mike Evans or Levante David or Baker Mayfield? That's yet to be seen, but we're looking at a team that has 2 bookend tackles. They have a young running back, a young tight end. They have a very strong defensive line with V and Cansey and Logan Hall, and they have their full secondary for the most part locked up with Carlton Davis and Jamel Dean, and I feel very confident they'll bring back Winfield. So even though they're probably going to part with a couple of key pieces this year, I think they'll still be in the conversation for winning the South again next year. Some of that will depend on what they do in the offseason, what the other teams do in the offseason, how Bryce Young develops. I think that's going to have a huge impact on the future of the NFC South. But I do think this is a little bit of a retool on the fly, and Jason Light has been ahead of the curve the last 2 years with that.
Yeah, it's always tough when they have to move on from some of these key players. We remember when we thought Levante David played his last game, and it's just a tough thing. And I'm hoping, especially if they make a decent push, that they can bring back a lot of those players, if that is at all possible. Listen, JT, I want to thank you for joining us on this edition of the Bucs Report. Why don't you tell everyone where we can find your work?
Sure. So you can find all my written work at bucsreport.com. Got a couple of articles out this week, kind of looking at the first quarter of the season, talking about, is this sustainable? Is it not? Going to have a lot of previews for the Lions game next week. That should be a good potential playoff preview. And you can find my podcast, the Creamsicle Chronicle podcast, Friday nights at 9:30. I also do a podcast for sports gambling. If anyone's interested in that, you can catch that on Wednesday night. We're called Around the Book. But yeah, that's where I'm at.
All right, JT, I want to thank you for joining us on this edition of the Bucs Report, and I want to thank you all for joining us.